back to another episode of Dusty. Now this episode is going to be pretty exciting because as you can see behind me, I've got some fancy new parts. Now I've got a full suspension kit for this that we're going to be chucking in today. So here's all the interesting stuff for Dusty. Now I've got new shockies, I've got new steering dampener, I've got new springs, new bushes, new U-bolts, everything to redo the suspension on it. So as you've probably worked out already, I've gone with some Old Man Emu suspension from ARB. Now there was a lot of different options out there for suspension for these old 40s, but the Old Man Emu stuff kind of just stood out. The springs had a lot of good things going for them, it seemed. It's all made in Australia, it all looks good quality stuff, so I chose to go with ARB. So now there's all the shackles and pins. Now these are the front ones. They're actually thicker than the back, surprisingly. And the front ones are shorter and thinner than the backs. But we've got all new pins, we've got pin kit, and we've just got 2 pins. Which I don't know why that happened, but that's what we've got. It'll do the job. But no, these are definitely going to be an upgrade from the old ones, because these are anti-inversion, they're all greasable. It's going to be really nice and strong. So before I go jacking everything up in the air, I'm going to go and loosen everything off. So I'm going to loosen the fixed end pins, I'm going to loosen the U-bolts, I'm going to loosen the shackles. We'll see if we have to take the sway bar off, but I don't think we will. So I'll just go around and loosen everything before it all gets jacked up in the air. So now that that's done, I can get some hide on the big girl. So now that we've got all the wheels off, we've got good access to everything. Good access to the shackles, good access to the springs and U-bolts. So we'll get loosening everything off and we can drop everything down and start putting some new stuff in. So now that the U-bolts are loosened off, I can just get the ratchet onto it. And it's not too hard just to take them off. So that's the spring down. Now the whole side of the chassis is kind of not really supported, so you just got to be a bit careful. But I'm going to undo the actual shackle first, because if you undo that first, everything pivots around and it's a bit of a pain. So you undo that one, it just falls to the ground, undo that one, slide it out, and then do the reverse for putting it in. Undo that little bolt. So now we've got the spring. Just drag it out over here, get it out of the way. And these two are the back ones here with the big load bearers on them. We'll drag one of those around, but before we chuck it in we have to clean everything up. So all these really need is just a bit of a wire brush. Then I'll paint some fish oil over that and it'll be right. So now just a little bit of rolled up sandpaper just to get rid of all the rust inside the actual eye. So sandpaper is not really going to help what's actually in there. There's a heap of flaky rust, so I've just got that little bit of a chisel or a punch and I'm just going to scrape it out. So I've cleaned up that eye, no flaky rust in it. Now I have to clean up the base plate. So that's got all flaky rust on it and it looks pretty horrible. So I'm going to get a bit of wire wheel on that, put a bit of fish oil on it and it'll be right to go back on. It needed a little bit more than just a bit of a wire wheel. It needed the hammer on it to like break off a heap of flaky rust, but this fish oil on it should seal it for another 40 odd years. So the bump stops have had the same thing done, all the rust removed, all the flaky stuff at least, and fish oiled, and then they can go back there. So here's the 2 new leaves. Now the top one's the new one, of course, and the bottom one is the old one. There's a few differences between them. The top one has 9 leaves with 3 load bearers, and the bottom one has 8 leaves with only 2 load bearers. So the top one's a 50mm lifted heavy duty spring that's about 400 kilo constant. There's a few differences as well. They've got anti-friction pads in them, where the old ones didn't, and you can see it's actually eaten away there at the spring. They've got tapered leaves on the new ones. They've got this flat spot in the middle, and this is one of the big reasons I went Old Man Emu, because that apparently gives you a better ride and better flex. Probably a bit less noise with these anti-friction pads. Better center pin. They've got the same amount of clips. Both have the big military wrap on the fixed shackle end. That happens if your main leaf breaks, your second leaf will grab onto it. But other than that, they're the same principle, but the new leaf has a lot more features to it. So when we're putting the spring in, there's a longer and there's a shorter side, measured from the center point here. And the longer side goes to the swinging shackle, and the shorter side goes to the fixed shackle. And also some cars, they have different springs for different sides, but you can tell if it's the same just by, if it's the same part number, it's the same spring for each side. Now for some reason I've got a new set of fixed shackle pins, and that's going to go on the front, but then I also have just the pin. I don't have the actual plate, which isn't really big of a deal. I just smack this old pin out, smack this new one in. It's greasable as well, so this might be a bit of a challenge getting this out. Might need some heat. Wasn't as bad as I thought. That just pops out of there, and then these new ones just slot in their place. So now with these new ones, I'm just going to put a little bit of grease on the splines. Sit that in, and then we'll just give it a bash in. We can put the grease nipple back in. So now to fit the fixed shackle side of the spring. Now I've got these new bushes here. They've got knurling on the inside to hold the grease in, and they're not flogged out like the old ones. There's a little bit of grease on them, so I'm going to pop those in. And then we'll get our pin, grease that up. Make sure that goes in, and then we can pop that up into the car. So now we have the bolt that holds this on. I'm just going to chuck a little bit of medium strength Loctite on it and just tighten that down. Now just a little bit of thread lock on this inside one as well, and then we can just screw the nut on. So now I've got to make the actual swinging shackles. Now there's two of these plates. One isn't threaded and the other one is. So you get the threaded one, and with these the pins, you get the small or the less threaded end, and that just threads into one side of the plate. Do the same for the bottom. Then you get this pin that goes up the top. Put one of the nuts on it, and that is pretty much all you have to do now, except for putting the lock nuts on there. So that's what the shackle will look like on the car. It'll hang up there, and it pivots, and it's got the anti-inversion, like pin and extra bits on it, so they'll be good. But we're not going to tighten these up fully now. They're just pretty much hand tight. Once it goes in the car, we can do them all to torque spec. So now for the rear, I'm going to slap the two new bushes in, the eye up the top, a little bit of grease on the pins just so they slide in easier. Now I'll get the back plate on. Put the two spring washers on, and then two nuts Now the U-bolts can go over. Now it was a little awkward filming this bit, but I've got two of the nuts with washers on with the base plate, and I've got a little bit of blue Loctite, and I'm just going to put that in the threads, there, tighten them up, and then we can jack the car up and do everything to torque spec. So this is what I've got so far. Everything's pretty much done up. The plate's in, it's sitting really nice. Not a bad shackle angle at the moment, but once there's a bit of weight on it, should return pretty good. Yeah, pretty happy with this. Now I'm just going to nip everything up a little bit, take the bottoms off the U-bolts so I can get my socket up in there, and we'll put some weight back on it and tighten everything up. So now to put the shockies on. Now these are the Nitro Charger Sports. Even though this is plastic, it's pretty strong, like it's really thick, feels really decent. They're going to look good in here, that's for sure. So we'll take this strapping off, put some bushes in, grease it up a bit and slap it on. So a little bit of grease on the outside of these bushes just to help them slide in a bit easier. And then slide them in. That was a fair bit of work, but they're in good now. So now before I put the shocks on, I've got to bleed them. Just let them go through their cycle a few times. And now I can chuck the top part of the shock on. Put the shock on the spring plate. Now just the little washers. And that's all there is to this side. I've got the springs in, I've got the new shockies in, the wheels back on, anti-inversion shackles with the grease nipples on them. Now I'm going to install the other side and come back to you when that's done, and we'll torque everything back up and put all grease in the actual grease nipples. So now that everything's in, the shockies are in, the springs are in, the wheels are on, and I've given it a jump up and down on the back to get everything a bit seated. We have to go around, tighten all the U-bolts up, tighten all the shackles and fix pins, do the shockies, and it'll all be good after that. So the U-bolts are the hardest thing to torque up. They have to be done to about 150 Newton meters. So the fixed shackle gets done to 80 Newton meters. So now to torque the shackles down, the side with the grease nipples gets done to 40 Newton meters, and the side on the inside without grease nipples gets done to 80 Newton meters. The shocks get done to around 50 Newton meters. So now that the back springs and shockies are all done, it's time to do the front end. Now I'm already about halfway through this, but it's pretty much exactly the same as the rear. You just bash all the old stuff out. I've got all the new bushes in the springs and the eyes. I've got the back end of the spring already in with the new pin. This is the new whole pin kit, which is really good. That's all torqued up already, and now I've just got to lift the spring up, put the front shackle in, put the new U-bolts on, and that's half of the front stuff done. Then we can put the steering dampener on. So on this front one here, there's two different U-bolts. One's a actual U-bolt and one's more or less square. The square one sits up the back there, kind of closest to the centre of the disc, and the normal one sits on the outside. Now just the same as the back, these front shocks have to be bled as well. Now they're a little bit softer to push down because there's not going to be so much load in the front, but you just run those through a few cycles, put a bit of grease on the bushes, and we can put them in. And here's the new shock in. Now that really sets off the front end with that big new spring and the new shock there. So in the kit for the steering dampener, they got all new hardware. So instead of keeping the old stuff, we've got the new stuff there. So we may as well pull the old pins out, which isn't too hard, and put some new stuff in. So the old one's out of there, went flying somewhere, but we've got the new one here, and that'll just sit up in there. Then we just have to kind of tap it in. And now once everything's on and just tightened down a bit, we've got to torque it down to about 80 Newton meters. So now that's all we have to do to Dusty this episode. We've got all the suspension in, we've got all the new Old Man Emu shocks, all the springs, all the new shackles, the new steering dampener. So it's going to be riding like a new car again, and we'll be able to take a bit more weight with those big heavy rear springs.